The crowd gasped collectively as the church doors swung open to reveal Hannah Wilson standing alone in her wedding gown, her veil doing little to hide the tears streaming down her face. The year was 1875, and in the small town of Cottonwood Springs, Arizona Territory, nothing could be more scandalous than a bride abandoned at the altar. Hannah's hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet of wildflowers, the blooms beginning to wilt in the June heat, much like her dreams of marital bliss. Hannah had been engaged to Thomas Reed, the banker's son, for nearly 8 months. Their courtship had been proper, if not passionate, and Hannah had convinced herself that companionship and security were adequate substitutes for love. Now, as the whispers rippled through the congregation, she realized how foolish she'd been. "I'm sorry, dear," Reverend Johnson murmured, his weathered face etched with concern. "Perhaps there's been some misunderstanding. Shall we wait a bit longer?" Hannah shook her head, unable to form words through the knot in her throat. Thomas had made his intentions clear enough, or rather, his lack of intentions. A hastily scribbled note delivered by his younger brother just an hour before had explained that he couldn't go through with the marriage and had taken the mourning stage to California. "He's not coming," she finally managed, her voice barely audible. The murmurs grew louder. Hannah could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders, heavier than her mother's lace veil. She had become the object of pity, the cautionary tale mothers would tell their daughters. In a town as small as Cottonwood Springs, this humiliation would follow her forever. "Perhaps we should all return home," suggested the Reverend, attempting to disperse the crowd with as much dignity as possible. Hannah stood frozen as the congregation began to file out, avoiding her eyes while stealing glances when they thought she wouldn't notice. Her mother approached, her face a mask of controlled fury. "How could you let this happen, Hannah?" she hissed, adjusting her daughter's veil as if proper appearance could somehow salvage the situation. "What will people say?" "Mother, please," Hannah whispered, her eyes brimming with fresh tears. "Thomas left me." "I didn't. You must have done something to drive him away," her mother interrupted. "No man abandons a bride without reason." The accusation cut deeper than the abandonment itself. Hannah pulled away, stumbling backward down the church steps. She needed air, space, anything to escape the suffocating weight of her mother's disappointment and the town's judgment. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Hannah lifted her skirts and ran, ignoring the shocked gasps of those still lingering outside the church. She had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to flee. She made it as far as the edge of town before the reality of her situation caught up with her. Her wedding dress, beautiful but impractical, was already gathering dust along the hem. She had no money, no horse, and nowhere to go. The town behind her offered nothing but humiliation, while the vast expanse of desert and mountains ahead promised dangers she wasn't prepared to face. Hannah sank to her knees in the dirt, no longer caring about the pristine white of her gown. What did it matter now? The dress would never serve its purpose. She would never be a wife, never have a home of her own, never escape her mother's house or the whispers that would follow her through town. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered through her despair. It wasn't until a shadow fell across her that Hannah looked up, hastily wiping her tears with the back of her hand. A man sat atop a dappled gray horse, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. Dust covered his clothes, suggesting he'd been riding hard for some time. "Madam." His voice was deep and tinged with concern. "Are you all right?" Hannah almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. She was a bride in a wedding dress kneeling in the dirt at the edge of town. Nothing about her situation was all right. "I'm fine," she lied, struggling to her feet with as much dignity as she could muster. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his considerable height. He reached out a hand to steady her but stopped short of touching her arm. "Forgive me for saying so, but you don't look fine," he said, his voice gentler now. Is there somewhere I can take you, someone waiting for you? Hannah shook her head, fresh tears threatening to spill. No one's waiting, not anymore. The stranger's eyes narrowed slightly as understanding dawned. You're the bride. I heard talk in the last town over about a wedding today in Cottonwood Springs. Hannah nodded, unable to speak. The man studied her for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. My name's Daniel Caldwell, he said with a slight bow. I'd be honored to escort you wherever you need to go, miss. Wilson, Hannah Wilson. She hesitated, then added, and I don't know where I need to go. I can't go back there. Daniel nodded thoughtfully, replacing his hat. Then perhaps you'll allow me to offer a suggestion. My sister's place is about a half-day's ride from here. She's good people and she could use the company. You'd be welcome there until you decide what comes next. Hannah knew she should refuse. Her mother had warned her countless times about the dangers of strange men, especially in these territories where law was often more suggestion than rule. But something about Daniel Caldwell's steady gaze reassured her. He had kind eyes, she decided. Thomas had never looked at her with such genuine concern. Why would you help me? She asked. You don't know me. Daniel shrugged, adjusting the reins in his hand. Let's just say I've seen enough of the world to know when someone needs a helping hand. He paused, then added softly, no one should be alone on what was meant to be the happiest day of their life. Hannah weighed her options quickly. Return to town and face the pity and gossip, or take a chance on this stranger's kindness. In that moment, the choice seemed surprisingly easy. I accept your offer, Mr. Caldwell, she said, straightening her shoulders, though I'm afraid I'm not dressed for riding. For the first time, a smile touched Daniel's lips, transforming his weathered face. We'll manage, he assured her, offering his hand to help her mount the horse. Hannah gathered her skirts as best she could and allowed Daniel to lift her into the saddle. He mounted behind her, keeping a respectful distance despite the necessary proximity. Ready? He asked, his breath warm against her ear. Hannah nodded, feeling a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. As Daniel urged the horse forward, she cast one last glance at Cottonwood Springs, the town where she'd spent all her 22 years. She should have felt regret or fear, but instead, an unexpected sense of freedom bloomed in her chest. They rode in silence for a time, the rhythm of the horse's gait lulling Hannah into a strange calm. The Arizona landscape stretched around them, vast and beautiful in its rugged way. The afternoon sun painted the distant mesas gold and crimson, a sight Hannah had seen countless times but never truly appreciated until now. May I ask what happened? Daniel finally broke the silence. If you'd rather not speak of it, I understand. Hannah sighed, finding it oddly easier to confide in this stranger than it would have been with anyone from town. Thomas, my fiancé, decided he didn't want to marry me after all. He sent a note and took the stage to California. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he's a fool, he said simply. The unexpected declaration startled a laugh from Hannah. You don't even know me, Mr. Caldwell. I know enough, he replied. Any man who'd leave a woman like you waiting at the altar lacks both honor and sense. Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful that Daniel couldn't see her face. It's probably for the best, she said, trying to convince herself as much as him. We weren't in love, not really. It was a match that made sense for both families. And what about what makes sense for you? Daniel asked, his voice free of judgment. The question caught Hannah off guard. No one had ever asked what she wanted. It had always been about what was proper, what was expected, what would secure her future in the eyes of society. I don't know, she admitted. I've never really thought about it. Well, Daniel said, you've got time to figure it out now. They continued their journey, the conversation flowing more easily as the miles passed. Daniel told her about his sister's small ranch where he helped out between jobs as a cattle driver. Hannah shared stories of growing up in Cottonwood Springs, carefully edited to emphasize the good memories rather than the constraints she'd always felt. The sun was beginning its descent when they crested a hill, and Daniel pointed to a small cluster of buildings in the distance. "That's it," he said. "Harmony Valley. Not much to look at, but it's peaceful." Hannah took in the modest ranch house, barn, and corrals nestled in a green valley that stood in stark contrast to the surrounding desert. A small stream glittered in the late afternoon light, explaining the unexpected oasis of vegetation. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the sun. She watched their approach with visible curiosity, her stance wary until she recognized Daniel. Then she waved enthusiastically, hurrying to meet them. "Daniel, you're early. I wasn't expecting you for another," she stopped abruptly when she noticed Hannah. "Oh, you've brought company." Daniel dismounted and helped Hannah down from the horse. Up close, she could see the family resemblance between the siblings, the same blue eyes, though the woman's hair was darker. "Sarah, this is Miss Hannah Wilson. Hannah, my sister, Sarah Caldwell Parker." Hannah smoothed her dusty wedding dress self-consciously. "I apologize for arriving in such a state, Mrs. Parker." Sarah's eyes widened as she took in Hannah's attire, but to her credit, she recovered quickly. "No apologies needed, and please call me Sarah." She shot her brother a questioning look. "It's a long story," Daniel said. "One that might be better told inside if you don't mind." Sarah nodded, immediately taking charge. "Of course, come in, come in. You must be exhausted, Miss Wilson. I'll put on some coffee and find you something more comfortable to wear." Hannah followed Sarah into the simple but welcoming home, grateful for the woman's easy acceptance. Within the hour, she had been provided with a clean dress, a hot meal, and a sympathetic ear as Daniel explained the circumstances of their meeting. "Well," Sarah said when he finished, "you're welcome to stay as long as you need, Hannah. We don't get many visitors out here, and I could use the female company." "That's very kind," Hannah replied, overwhelmed by the siblings' generosity, "but I wouldn't want to impose." "Nonsense," Sarah waved her hand dismissively. "Daniel tells me you're good with a needle. That skill's worth its weight in gold out here. My husband James is due back from a supply run to Tucson in a few days, and between you and me, his shirts need more mending than I have time for." Daniel smiled at his sister. Sarah's being modest. "She runs this place almost single-handedly while James is trading. An extra pair of hands would be a blessing, not an imposition." Hannah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Then I accept, gratefully, though I should send word to my parents so they don't worry." "I'll take care of that," Daniel offered. "I need to head back toward town tomorrow anyway. Got some business with a rancher there." That night, in the small but comfortable guest room, Hannah sat on the edge of the bed and considered the extraordinary turn her life had taken in a single day. She had woken as a bride, been abandoned as a fiancée, and now found herself a guest in a stranger's home, miles from everything familiar. Yet somehow, for the first time in memory, she felt at peace with the uncertainty of her future. The following weeks settled into an unexpected rhythm. Hannah threw herself into ranch life with enthusiasm, finding satisfaction in work that left her tired but fulfilled at day's end. Sarah proved to be not just a generous hostess, but a friend. Teaching Hannah skills her proper upbringing had never included how to gather eggs without angering the hens, how to churn butter without exhausting her arms, how to ride astride rather than side saddle. James Parker returned from Tucson and welcomed Hannah with the same easy acceptance his wife had shown. A tall, quiet man with kind eyes, he seemed perfectly matched to Sarah's more talkative nature. Daniel came and went, his work with local ranchers keeping him busy but never too far from Harmony Valley. Each time he returned, Hannah found herself watching for him, her heart quickening at the sight of his tall figure on the horizon. He always brought news from Cottonwood Springs, carefully filtered to spare her feelings. Her mother had apparently spread the story that Hannah had suffered a breakdown after being jilted and was recovering with distant relatives. It wasn't entirely untrue, Hannah supposed, though she'd never felt more clear-headed or healthy. Summer deepened into fall. The days grew shorter, the desert nights cooler. Hannah's wedding dress hung forgotten in the back of a closet, a relic of a life that increasingly felt like someone else's. One evening in late September, Hannah sat on the porch, enjoying the sunset and the pleasant ache in her muscles after a day of helping with the harvest from Sarah's vegetable garden. She heard approaching hoofbeats and looked up to see Daniel returning from a 3-day absence. He dismounted wearily but smiled when he saw her. "Evening, Miss Wilson." Hannah returned his smile, noting how he still addressed her formally despite the months of acquaintance. "Mr. Caldwell, you look tired." "Long ride," he admitted, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Worth it, though. Got some good news." "Oh." Hannah set aside her mending, curious. Daniel joined her on the porch, settling into the chair beside hers. "The Circle Artiques owner offered me a job as foreman, year-round position, decent pay. That's wonderful." Hannah exclaimed, genuinely pleased for him. "Though Sarah will miss having you around." Daniel glanced at her sideways. "And you, will you miss me too?" The question hung in the air between them. Hannah felt her cheeks warm and looked down at her hands. "The ranch won't be the same without your visits," she said carefully. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Hannah," he said, dropping the formality, "I've been thinking about this job, about settling down. I'm 30 years old. Been drifting most of my adult life. Might be time for something more permanent." Hannah's heart quickened at the intensity in his voice. "That sounds wise," she managed. "Thing is," he continued, "a ranch foreman should have a home, a real home, and I've never been much good at the domestic side of things." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "I was wondering if you might consider a partnership of sorts." Hannah stared at him, uncertain of his meaning. "What kind of partnership?" Daniel met her gaze directly. "The marrying kind, if you'd be willing." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Hannah had never expected this, though if she were honest with herself, she had begun to hope for it. "Daniel," she said softly, "are you proposing to me?" He nodded, a hint of vulnerability in his expression that she'd never seen before. "I know it's sudden, and I know your experience with engagements hasn't been the best, but I care for you, Hannah. More than I thought possible when I found you on that road in your wedding dress." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the tears she'd shed months ago. "It's not sudden," she said. "Not really. We've been getting to know each other all this time." "Is that a yes?" Daniel asked, hope evident in his voice. Hannah reached for his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. "I think," she said carefully, "that I've been waiting for you all my life, even when I didn't know it. So yes, Daniel Caldwell, I will marry you." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the darkest night. He lifted her hand to his lips. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory." Hannah laughed softly. "Just promise me one thing, anything. Promise you'll show up for the wedding." Daniel's laugh joined hers, deep and genuine. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." Their wedding 2 months later bore little resemblance to the elaborate affair that had been planned in Cottonwood Springs. They married in the Parkers' front room, with Sarah and James as witnesses and a circuit preacher officiating. Hannah wore a simple blue dress that Sarah had helped her sew, adorned only with a small brooch that had belonged to Daniel's mother. What the ceremony lacked in pageantry, it made up for in sincerity. When Hannah spoke her vows this time, her voice was clear and confident. When Daniel promised to cherish her all his days, she believed him with every fiber of her being. The small house Daniel had secured near the Circle R ranch became their home. It was modest, 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but to Hannah, it represented freedom and possibility in a way that her parents' grander home never had. She took to ranch life with determination, learning to cope with the isolation and the endless work. There were difficult days, of course. Days when the wind howled so fiercely it seemed it might tear the roof from their home. Days when Daniel returned from work too exhausted for conversation. Days when Hannah's hands cracked and bled from the harsh soap and constant labor, but there were wonderful days too. Days when they rode together across the range, the vast landscape making Hannah feel both insignificant and incredibly alive. Evenings spent reading aloud by lamplight, Daniel's deep voice bringing stories to life. Mornings waking in his arms, feeling safe and cherished. Spring arrived, bringing with it unexpected news. Hannah was with child. Daniel's joy at the prospect of fatherhood transformed him, softening the edges that years of hard living had created. "We'll need a bigger house," he declared, already planning expansions. "This one will do fine for now," Hannah assured him, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "We have time." As her pregnancy progressed, Hannah received a letter from her mother, the first communication since she'd left Cottonwood Springs. It was stiffly formal, expressing concern for her welfare and conveying the news that Thomas Reed had returned from California and married a wealthy widow twice his age. Hannah read the letter with a strange detachment, as if it described events from someone else's life. She wrote back, sharing her own news of marriage and impending motherhood. She extended an invitation for her parents to visit, not expecting them to accept, but feeling it was right to offer. To her surprise, her father arrived alone 2 months later. He stood awkwardly on their porch, hat in hand, looking older and more uncertain than Hannah remembered. "Your mother couldn't make the journey," he explained, though Hannah suspected the truth was that her mother had refused to come. The visit was initially strained, but as her father saw Hannah's happiness and Daniel's clear devotion to her, his reserve gradually melted. By the time he left a week later, he had embraced Daniel as a son and promised to return when the baby arrived. "Your mother will come around," he told Hannah as he prepared to leave. "She's stubborn, but she loves you, and she's never been able to resist a grandchild." Hannah hugged him tightly. "Tell her we'll always welcome her whenever she's ready." Summer blazed across the land, bringing heat that made Hannah's condition increasingly uncomfortable. Daniel fussed over her constantly, bringing her cool drinks and insisting she rest during the hottest part of the day. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested, though secretly she cherished his attention. "You're carrying our future," he countered, kissing her forehead. "I'm allowed to worry." Their daughter arrived on a stormy September night with Sarah serving as midwife. After hours of labor, Hannah held the tiny, perfect being in her arms, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it stole her breath. Daniel cradled their daughter with hands that seemed suddenly too large and rough for such a delicate task. "She's beautiful," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Just like her mother." They named her Grace for the unexpected blessing she represented in their lives. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The small ranch house expanded room by room as their family grew to include a son, Samuel, 2 years after Grace. Daniel's position as foreman provided stability, and through careful saving, they eventually purchased a modest spread of their own. Hannah's mother did indeed come to visit when Grace was 3, arriving with trunks full of impractical gifts and a tentative willingness to accept her daughter's life. The visit was not without tension, but it marked the beginning of a gradual healing in their relationship. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Daniel surprised Hannah with a gift, her old wedding dress, carefully altered and updated to reflect current fashions. "I thought perhaps you might want to wear it for a proper celebration," he suggested. "A renewal of our vows with all our friends and family present." Hannah touched the fabric, remembering the girl who had stood abandoned and afraid at the church steps. "I don't need a fancy ceremony to know what we have is real," she said, "but I would like to celebrate how far we've come." Their vow renewal was held under the cottonwood trees by the creek that ran through their property. Grace scattered wildflower petals along a makeshift aisle, while Samuel watched solemnly from his grandfather's arms. Friends from neighboring ranches and both their families, including Hannah's mother, gathered to witness their recommitment to each other. As Hannah walked toward Daniel in her transformed wedding dress, she reflected on the twisting path that had led her here. Thomas Reed's abandonment, once the greatest humiliation of her life, now seemed like a blessing in disguise. "You look just as beautiful as the day I found you," Daniel murmured when she reached him. "I'm happier now," Hannah replied. "Much happier." Later that evening, with their guests departed and their children asleep, they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Thomas hadn't left you at the altar?" Daniel asked, his arm around her shoulders. Hannah considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then I look at our life at Grace and Samuel, at everything we've built together, and I can't imagine any other path." Daniel squeezed her gently. "When I found you that day, I never imagined where it would lead. I just knew I couldn't leave you there alone." Hannah leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "That's the difference between you and Thomas," she said softly. "He left when things got difficult. You've never walked away, not once." "And I never will," Daniel promised, kissing the top of her head, "not as long as there's breath in my body." As the night deepened around them, Hannah thought about the frightened bride she had been and the woman she had become, wife, mother, rancher. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. The abandoned bride had trembled alone outside a church, her dreams in tatters. But a cowboy had ridden up and taken her home, not just to a place but to himself, to a love that had transformed them both. And in that love, Hannah had found not just refuge but purpose. Not just acceptance but joy. Not just a home, but a life beyond anything she could have imagined on that fateful wedding day when everything had seemed to end, but had in fact only just begun.